An Old West silver rush site roamed by the restless spirits of those who lost their lives in search of the ultimate fortune. A failed border city whose derelict grounds play host to strong paranormal activity after dark. And an abandoned community recognized as the real-world version of the infamous Silent Hill games await on this list of some of the most haunted ghost towns in the United States. Let's dive right in. Hey guys, and thanks for joining me on this journey through some of the most haunted ghost towns in the US. Recognized for its history of settlement and of town sites that just couldn't quite cut it in the New World, the United States is absolutely jam-packed with weathered ruins and rundown structures that stand as testament to an era long since past, many of which that are surrounded by tales of ghostly encounters and chilling old hill folklore sure to send shivers down the spines of any would-be explorers. Are you ready to get rolling? Our first haunt has us skirting the western end of Montana and braving the iconic Garnet ghost town. Garnet, Montana, which is located in Granite County, is a former mining community turned ghost town. Its remaining structures, through more recent times, have grown in popularity as a tourist and adventure destination, and in infamy due to their purported ghostly happenings. Historically, following the 1848 California gold rush, mining and prospecting would become profitable and lucrative trades in the West. And through the region, mining of the Garnet Mountains would begin through the 1860s, possibly even a bit earlier. In 1895, a small stamp mill was constructed near First Chance Gulch, and around it would grow the town of Mitchell, which only 2 years later would reestablish itself as Garnet. Through 1898, Garnet would welcome its heyday, and its populace would hit just over 1,000 people, during which time it would boast a jaw-dropping 13 saloons, 3 hotels, a general store, a barber shop, and a mercantile. Notably, the town's hotels were established to accommodate both tourists to the region and transport personnel traveling to the community to pick up hauls of gold. However, those trying their hand at mining who couldn't afford the $1 to $3 suite fees could also stay in the attics for a quarter a night, which, considering 2024 hotel pricing, sounds pretty nice. During this era, Garnet would function like many other ghost towns and would harbor good and bad elements, the latter being altercations over gold that could often turn violent, and rampant alcoholism from those who migrated locally in search of their fortunes but came up empty-handed. Garnet's prosperity was short-lived, however, as its veins ran dry, and local mines began ceasing operations, resulting by 1900 in a sharp decline in population to around just 300 residents, most of whom that were seeking greener pastures elsewhere to chisel out a more profitable lifestyle. Over subsequent years, the town's populace would rise, and decline again, mostly in sync with the success of local mining operations, until 1912 when a massive fire wiped any hopes of recovery straight off the board. Despite this disastrous event and following its abandonment, at first because of it literally sitting untouched and later due to statewide efforts, Garnet remained one of the best preserved ghost towns in the US. More recently, in 2010, the site was listed as the Garnet Historic District on the National Register of Historic Places, and in the present, the ghost town is owned and preserved under the US Bureau of Land Management and welcomes literally countless visitors each year. Chillingly, from Garnet's many visitors and some officials, a host of spine-tingling ghost stories have emerged from this weathered old township, and those who have braved its bounds have told of figures sighted in long dormant buildings, of phantom voices, footsteps, and hoofbeats heard emanating from thin air, and of encounters with a host of full-bodied apparitions in clothing spanning the eras. One more popular Garnet haunted hotspot is easily that of Kelly's Saloon. Built in 1898 under Robert Moore and purchased by L.P. Kelly for just $1,500, it was possibly the most popular of the aforementioned 13 saloons, and offered both drink and a plethora of working girls. Today, those who visit the saloon, especially after dark, tell of music that drifts through the air, of laughter and shouts, and the clinking of glasses, all phenomena that occur even through the dead of winter when the site is completely closed down. Informal investigations of Garnet have yielded high EMF levels even in the absence of electricity, eerie EVPs, and orbs and odd distortions captured in photography and video, while others have told of watching doors open and close inexplicably, and of objects within various buildings moving of their own volition. Another infamous haunt on site is that of the Wells Hotel, which, in 1897, was designed under Mr. and Mrs. Wells, and that features elegant woodwork, stained glass, and luxury not very common back in its day and age. Today, it's believed that several guests there may have either died within or shortly after staying at the Wells, and all but common are sounds from vacant rooms, lights seen through the windows at night, and run-ins with a ghostly woman in an old-fashioned dress who's usually spied lurking upstairs. Our second haunt has us literally straddling the Texas-New Mexico border and checking out the failed community of Glen Rio. Glen Rio, which stretches between Deaf Smith County in Texas and Kay County in New Mexico, and it's placed just off of the infamous US Route 66, is a former railroad stop turned ghost town that's derelict bounds are shrouded in old hill ghost stories and tales of spirits from long since past. Historically, in 1901, the Chicago, Rock Island, and Pacific Railroad would forge its way through the region. By 1903, the start of what would become Glen Rio had been established as Rock Island, and in 1905, the locale was opened up to farms, businessmen, and other settlers trying to earn a living off the landscape. Shortly after its creation, in 1908, Rock Island would be renamed by the railroad to Glen Rio. By 1917, the township would begin welcoming in tourists off the Ozark Trail, and on November 11th of 1926, the trail would be transformed into the now iconic Route 66. By the 1930s, Glen Rio's focus would shift from rail activity to serving travelers along the route, which had grown wildly in popularity, and it would offer several filling stations, a restaurant, and a motel. And through the 1950s, the road was widened significantly, after which the town site's Texaco station and diner would be constructed. Notably, during this same time period, the Joseph Brownlee House, which had been constructed in Amarillo in 1930, was actually moved to Glen Rio in 1950. In 1953, the State Line Cafe and gas station was opened, and in 1957, the Texas Longhorn Motel was established and today is known both as the first and last motel in the state. For a time, Glen Rio would act as a fairly popular tourist destination, drawing in those from surrounding communities and from other states entirely, but its luck was about to run out. Beginning through the early 1970s, work on Interstate 40 was started and aimed to create a major highway capable of tying multiple regions together, while also acting as a primary thoroughfare. Unfortunately for Glen Rio, its path was charted to bypass the town, and following this segment's completion in 1975, the economy would begin a rapid decline. Over subsequent years, Glen Rio's inhabitants would begin moving elsewhere. Through the 1980s, tracks belonging to what was then the Rock Island Railroad were officially removed, and in its twilight, the Joseph Brownlee House and the Texas Longhorn Motel office were the last local structures to be occupied, before the community's total abandonment. More recently, in 2007, the town was listed on the National Register of Historic Places as the Glen Rio Historic District, and through June of 2008, the state of New Mexico would establish the Glen Rio Welcome Center off of I-40, right at the Texas state line, to offer a movie theater, educational kiosks, a livestock corral, and even a pet walk. In the present, Glen Rio remains a popular tourist attraction and offers a glimpse into what life was like through the 40s and 50s, as well as through the budding age of automobile travel. Through recent times, this long-dormant township has picked up a reputation as one of the United States' most haunted ghost towns, and those who have braved its bounds have reported instances of personal electronics behaving erratically, of well-maintained vehicles that refuse to start, leaving their riders stranded, and of doors to the site's various buildings opening and closing on their own. Some who have ventured into Glen Rio alone have reported hearing voices and chatter from the cafe when it's completely empty, and several more chilling tales tell of those who have actually entered the building to find place settings at tables, or that pick up the smells of fresh coffee or cooking foods without source. Informal investigations of Glen Rio have yielded strange EMF fluctuations, hits on spirit boxes, and ominous shadowy figures captured in photography, while others have told of personal possessions going missing and being discovered later within buildings that they didn't even enter. Lastly, several accounts from those who have stayed in Glen Rio after nightfall tell of them exiting various structures to watch in awe as lines of spectral classic cars speed through its street before disappearing mere yards outside of the city limits, while others departing have detailed terrifying instances in which they are actually followed by these ghost vehicles for a time before watching them spontaneously vanish through the rearview mirror. And on to number 3, which takes us just east of Phoenix, Arizona to the Goldfield ghost town. Goldfield, Arizona, which is placed in Pinal County, is a former mining community first turned ghost town, then more recently into a tourist attraction that's bound weather a long history of prosperity, intrigue, and even violence, and that has also grown in recognition as one of the most haunted places in the US. Historically, through the late 1800s and the gold boom, several mines would be opened through the Goldfield area following a strike in 1892. And on October 7th of 1893, the Goldfield Post Office was established, with one James L. Patterson stepping up as its first postmaster. Over subsequent years, Goldfield would rapidly boom in the shadow of several prominent strikes, as well as under the legend of the Lost Dutchman's gold mine, which I actually covered in my Arizona upload if you haven't seen it yet. And at its peak, the township would host a population of around 4,000, while offering 3 saloons, a boarding house, a general store, a brewery, a blacksmith, a butcher, a school, and much, much more. Like many of its peers, however, Goldfield's reign was very short-lived, and over just its first 5 years, as its veins began producing lower quality ore, a large bulk of its residents began moving elsewhere in search of higher profits. This trend would continue until finally, on November 2nd of 1898, the Goldfield Post Office would close its doors, and the site would be declared a ghost town. But its story wouldn't stop there. Following its abandonment, some prospectors would cling to the landscape and to hopes it still yielded undiscovered gold veins. And through the first decade of the 20th century, Secretary and Governor of Arizona, one George Young, would move out to the township to try his hand at mining utilizing new methods, while also spurring the construction of a mill and a cyanide plant. Slowly, the governor would breathe new life back into the locale, and when a second post office was constructed, Goldfield would be re-established as Youngsburg, after which people would once again start settling into the area. Sadly, however, this second era of prosperity would only last for about as long as the first one, and once again, 5 years later, gold veins would dry up. On October 30th of 1926, the area's second post office would close its doors, and the town would die out once more. Much later, in 1966, ghost town, mining, and treasure hunting enthusiast Bob Shoes would visit the Superstition Mountains and would instantly fall in love with the area. In 1970, he would move to Mesa and would begin playing with the idea of owning his own chunk of history. And in 1984, he and his wife Lou Ann would purchase the old Goldfield mill site, after which they would rebuild a number of its buildings in the old mining tunnel before, in 1988, opening their attraction to the public. Over the years, more buildings and businesses would be fixed up and opened up in Goldfield, and in the present, it remains a popular attraction that, unlike other ghost towns, is actually manned by a number of people to create a truly immersive experience complete with food, drink, educational materials, mock shootouts, games, tours, and much, much more. But it's not all fun and games in Goldfield, and over the years, a number of chilling ghost stories have emerged from its bounds. Incidentally, both staff and visitors to the site have reported locked doors discovered inexplicably unlocked upon opening up for the day, lights and figures sighted in structures that are supposed to be closed, and run-ins with full-bodied apparitions that appear so solid that most think them actors, before turning to find that they've mysteriously vanished from sight. Some of the most famous accounts of Goldfield hauntings tell of instances that occur before or after the park is opened, when several have reported old machinery coming to life, or the streets being filled with people in old-fashioned attire that creepily rush out of view through doors and around corners all at once, leaving the expanse silent once again. Informal investigations of Goldfield have yielded high EMF levels, perturbing EVPs captured in video, and extreme temperature fluctuations, while others have claimed to have seen spectral miners or cowboys with bullet holes or other grievous wounds that are there one moment and gone the next. Lastly, if you're a paranormal enthusiast looking to visit Goldfield, we highly recommend checking out one of its newer features, being Fear Frontier's Goldfield Ghost Tour, which is a literal lantern light tour of the town, on which specialist Matt Mason covers more sinister parts of the area's past, as well as resulting supernatural infestations. But this tour doesn't just cover the town site, it also takes guests below it and into the mines, where several have reported being pushed, grabbed, or even pinched from the darkness. Number 4 has us traveling a few hours to the northeast of Los Angeles, California, to the iconic state silver rush town of Calico. Calico, California, which is seated in San Bernardino County, is a former silver mining town turned tourist attraction. This expanse is dotted with educational materials, points of interest, and old structures preserved to accommodate visitors today, and that also ties itself to a handful of chilling local legends and stories of otherworldly activity. Historically, Calico's roots stretch back to 1881, when 4 prospectors departed the Grapevine Station, an area which now holds Barstow, California, and headed out towards a particularly prominent mountain peak that they described as calico in color. Subsequently, as they began working the land and as others settled into the locale, their mountain and the town it grew upon would become known as what else but Calico. Notably, these original prospectors would discover silver in the mountain and would go on to open the Silver King Mine, which was actually California's largest and most profitable silver producer through the mid-1880s, and that derived its name from acting San Bernardino County Sheriff John C. King, who funded the men's expedition, and who was actually the uncle of Walter Knott of the famous Knott's Berry Farm. In 1882, the Calico Post Office would open its doors. Over the following year, the community would boom to support 5 general stores, 3 hotels, 3 restaurants, and a handful of bars, brothels, boarding houses, and a meat market. And at the height of its silver production from 1883 to 1885, the town would boast over 500 mines and a population of around 1,200 people. As with other mining towns of the era, as the population grew, so did crime and violence, and local bad men who were either killed in combat or executed were laid to rest in the city's Calico Cemetery, or more affectionately, Boot Hill. Following the discovery of colemanite in the mountain, by 1890, Calico's population had more than doubled and sat at around 3,500. However, things were about to drastically change. Later the same year, the Silver Purchase Act was passed, decreasing the metal's value, resulting over subsequent months in the townspeople moving elsewhere. By 1898, the post office would be forced to close its doors, and with the end of borax mining looming, in 1907, the site was all but a ghost town, with a large portion of its remaining structures actually being moved to Barstow, Daggett, or Yermo. While an attempt to breathe new life into Calico would transpire in 1915 with the creation of a cyanide plant, eventually the township just wasn't economically viable anymore. Through the 1940s, and after the construction of Ghost Town at Knott's Berry Farm, Walter Knott, his son Russell, and art director Paul Van Cleben would travel to Calico in consideration of utilizing its remains. And in 1951, Knott would purchase the whole of the ex-community, after which, with the help of Van Cleben, he would recreate and restore the site and its buildings utilizing old photographs, blueprints, and maps. More recently, in 1962, Calico would be listed as a California Historical Landmark. In 1966, Walter would end up donating Calico to San Bernardino County, after which it would be officiated as a regional park. And in 2005, it was declared as the official state Silver Rush ghost town. In the present, Calico remains open to the public, offering mine tours, gunfight shows, gold panning, and a handful of restaurants and small shops. But as famous as it is for its history and silver, Calico carries with it another legacy, one wrought with reports of strong paranormal activity. And throughout the town, many have reported extreme cold spots felt in adverse weather, instances of windows or doors opening and closing by themselves, and accounts of various objects moving around inexplicably. Of the town's most famous hauntings, perhaps none are more renowned than claims that the ghosts of John and Lucy Lane, who ran a general store locally through Calico's boom, might still linger in the place they once called home. In life, the couple actually loved the locale so that even after its abandonment, they remained behind and tried as hard as they could to revive the community. Incidentally, their full-bodied apparitions have been sighted together on multiple occasions, usually near their old store, sometimes tending other buildings, and at others, walking the main stretch or just watching the sunset. Another famous haunted hotspot in Calico is easily that of its old schoolhouse, which is actually a very popular point of interest, and those who have neared the site have reported hearing singing from within, laughter, and the sighting of small figures peering from its windows, when the building is supposed to be empty. Also reported across town and confined to no area alone are spook lights that drift through the air, disembodied whispers, and bootsteps that emanate from wooden floors when no one is on them. The shadowy spirit of a dog has been sighted in various places, though usually right around the cemetery, and the ghost of an angry old cowboy has been known to actually attack the living right around Hank's Hotel. Last but not least, our fifth and final haunt takes us eastbound to Pennsylvania's legendary Centralia. Centralia, Pennsylvania, which is located in Columbia County, contains the remains of a former town infamous for its abandonment following one of the strangest disasters in recent history. Its bounds have since become synonymous as a real-life Silent Hill, and that, in turn, are shrouded in a ton of ghost stories and tales of the inexplicable. Historically, lands now holding Centralia were, for thousands of years, frequented by tribes native to the region, including the Susquehannock. In 1749, they would sell the locale to colonial agents for a mere 500 pounds, and later still, in 1770 and during the construction of the Reading Road, which led to Fort Augusta, settlers to the region would begin surveying the area. In 1793, Revolutionary War hero and signatory of the Declaration of Independence Robert Morris would acquire a third of Centralia's valley lands. However, when he went bankrupt only 5 years later, in 1798, his claims were surrendered to the Bank of the United States, after which Philly-based sea captain Stephen Girard would purchase Morris's old share for $30,000, alongside 68 tracts to the east of the expanse, which he learned were ripe with coal. In 1832, one Jonathan Faust would open the Bull's Head Tavern in what was, at the time, called Roaring Creek Township. Eventually, the locale would come to be known as Bull's Head. In 1842, Centralia's lands were purchased by the Locust Mountain Coal and Iron Company. In 1854, the Mine Run Railroad was laid to transport coal from the valley, and subsequently, a town called Centerville was formed, after which, in 1865, it was re-established as, you guessed it, Centralia. Over the years, as the mining industry boomed, Centralia's population would grow, and naturally, crime would become more rampant. Sadly, in 1868, the town's very founder, Alexander Ray, was murdered in his buggy, following which several additional murders and arson incidents would transpire, and it was later discovered that these acts of violence were carried out by the Irish secret society, the Molly Maguires, with all parties involved eventually being found out and hanged. By 1890, Centralia had reached its peak and boasted a population of around 2,760 people, along with 27 saloons, 14 general stores, 7 churches, 5 hotels, 2 theaters, a bank, and a post office. And through this era, coal mining of the region would hit an all-time high. But Centralia's prosperity was short-lived, as slowly, young men who once worked the mines enlisted and later served in World War I. Additionally, following the Wall Street crash of 1929, a handful of the town's major mining operations were closed down, forcing what miners remained to essentially bootleg their product by participating in the illegal practice of pillar robbing, which, just as it sounds, further compromised the structural integrity of existing mines. Despite its setbacks, locals would hold fast to the place they called home, and mining would continue all the way up through the 1960s. But the town's fortune was about to dramatically change. On May 27th of 1962, local firefighters, as they had numerous times before, set the dump on fire to burn what they could, after which they would subdue the blaze. This year, however, they failed to fully extinguish the inferno, following which several live embers entered the old coal mines through an unsealed opening and started an underground oven-like fire, the likes of which had never been seen before, right below Centralia itself. A blaze that was not immediately visible or even noticeable to the community, but that spread rapidly out of sight into the deep reaches of the earth. Subsequently, in 1979, gas station owner and mayor John Coddington would raise alarm when he reported using a dipstick in one of his underground tanks and it coming back out scalding hot, and statewide attention was drawn in 1981 when a 12-year-old resident named Tom Dombrowski stumbled into a sudden sinkhole that was emitting steam and gas and was nearly swallowed whole before emergency personnel managed to pull him back out. Following these disastrous events, the town became divided on whether or not the fire actually posed a threat to the community, with half the populace hurriedly moving elsewhere and the other half clinging to their lands. By 1990, the population had declined to only 63 residents, with a majority of its buildings decaying or being literally consumed by effects of the underground fire. And in 1992, Governor Bob Casey would invoke eminent domain, after which, while residents tried for a time to fight this motion, they would eventually give in. In 2002, the Centralia zip code was discontinued. By 2006, only 16 homes remained, with longtime locals still eerily residing throughout the nearly abandoned settlement. And while in 2009, Governor Ed Rendell would begin formal eviction of remaining Centralia residents, the community would actually linger on in the shadows. In the present, shockingly, the decayed and overgrown town of Centralia's underground fire remains burning. That's right, over 60 years later, and the town has grown into something of a dark tourist attraction, both for historians and paranormal investigators, as well as for fans of the Silent Hill series. And rightfully so, as honestly guys, the actual hauntings sound like something straight out of one of those games, with those who know the area claiming it to be cursed by the fires of hell below, and reporting strange fogs or possibly smoke that envelop the former township, disturbing figures sighted through the haze, and ghostly vehicles spied cruising the mostly empty streets, testament to what once was. Of its recognizable apparitions, the spirit of the aforementioned murdered town founder Alexander Ray has been known to appear from time to time to condemn those who take his death lightly, and the manifestations of the hanged leaders of the Molly Maguires have been observed floating in various areas, and seemingly being pulled by their necks as their feet barely scrape the ground. Easily one of the most famous Centralia legends tells of how in 1869, one Father Daniel Ignatius McDermott, who is the city's first Roman Catholic priest, was assaulted by members of the Molly Maguires, and of how he cursed the town's lands and declared that of all of its structures, one day only the church would remain standing. Mind you, this was long before the fire ever started, and ironically, today the church is one of the few buildings in town that's survived. Incidentally, some tell that his curse is what led to the underground fire, and that the whole series of events opened a doorway or portal to hell. Near the overgrown chapel, many have reported sighting grotesque demonic creatures that lumber through its old yard. Disturbingly, these things have been known to chase the living at great lengths, or even stalk parties from surrounding woodlands. Additionally, several have reported instances in which the church doors swing wide open suddenly, and a priest, possibly the spirit of McDermott, emerges from within, screaming to the four winds while reciting Revelation 6:1-17, which many are probably familiar with, and that start with, "And I saw when the Lamb opened the seals, and I heard, as it were, the noise of thunder. One of the four beasts saying, 'Come and see,' and I saw, and behold, a white horse." Chillingly, these verses all have to do with death and the end times. Also reported throughout Centralia are encounters with townsfolk that are seemingly still living there, that many report as distant, detached, and vague, and some have told of turning corners onto empty roadways to find phantom versions of entire city blocks have materialized from thin air. A myriad of informal investigations have been held at Centralia and have yielded high EMF levels in the complete absence of electricity, EVPs containing chants, whispers, and demonic voices, and hits on thermal grids, while others have described the constant feeling of being followed or watched by someone or something unseen. Lastly, strange creatures that some relate to goblins or imps that are believed to have been freed into our world by the fire have been sighted wandering the region, and have even been known to chase and attack those who have gotten too near. Thanks for joining me on this journey through some of the most haunted ghost towns in the United States. If you enjoyed hearing my histories and ghost stories, subscribe to my channel, throw this upload a like, and share me with anyone you feel could use a good scare. I'll catch you all next time.